Alright, now we're going to be solving for an unknown with radicals. So if you look at 28b7, we have the square root of x equals 4. Well, to solve for x, we need to get x all by itself, which means we need to get rid of the radical. Square root. What is the opposite of square root? Squaring. So in math, you just have to do the opposite. The opposite of square root is squaring, so whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other side. Here, square root and square cancel each other out, and so you have x equals 16. It's really, really important for all these radical problems, you have to check your answers. It says it in the book to check your answers. So take your answer, put it back in the original problem, square root of 16. Does it equal 4? Yes, so it checks. Some of these, they will be not a valid solution because when you go to put your answer back in the original problem, it's a false statement. So let's look at 28b number 8. So here you have the cube root of x equals 1. Well, what is the opposite of cube root? The opposite of cube root is cubing. So whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other side. That and that cancels, so x equals 1 cubed is 1 times 1 times 1, which is 1. So you go back to check it. So checking it, take x equals 1 and put it back in the original problem. So that would be the cube root of 1 equals 1. The cube root of 1. What times itself 3 times gives you 1? 1. So yes, that does check. Now look at 28d number 10. So here we have the cube root. We need to get rid of that radical. So the opposite of cube root is cubing. Then you have to cube the other side. It is a negative number, so put it in parentheses. It makes a difference. That cancels. So here you have negative 3x equals negative 1 cubed. Negative 1 times negative 1 times negative 1 is a negative number. Divide both sides by negative 3. A negative divided by a negative is a positive, so x equals 1/3. I probably shouldn't be boxing these off yet until I check it. So now to check it, that would be cube root of negative 3 times 1/3 equals negative 1. That was the original equation. So here, that's 3 over 1. Those cancel. This ends up being the cube root of negative 1 equals negative 1. This is not imaginary. Only when it's a square root is it imaginary. So, yeah, that was a negative 1. So, the cube root of negative 1. So, if you do negative 1 times itself 3 times, is the cube root of negative 1 negative 1. In other words, you're saying what times itself 3 times will give you negative 1. Does this times itself 3 times really give you negative 1? It does. Negative 1 times negative 1 times negative 1. That does give you negative 1. So that does check. You can do the cube root of a negative number, but you cannot do the square root of a negative number. When this is an even number like 2, 4, 6, square root, 4th root, 6th root, you can't do that of a negative number. That's imaginary. But you can do cube root because a negative times itself 3 times does give you a negative number. Alright, let's look at 28d number 11. So here we have a radical on both sides. So this is square root. When there's no number, that's an implied 2. So to get rid of this, I square that side, which means I also have to square that side. Yay! The radicals go away on both sides, so then you're left with 4x minus 3 equals 2x plus 19. This just becomes an algebra problem of solving for x. 2x, add your 3 over here. So 2x equals 22. Divide both sides by 2. X equals 11. You have to check it. So when we check it, that would be square root of 4 times 11 minus 3 equals square root of 2 times 11. I'm just putting 11 in for x everywhere I see an x. And if this is a true statement, it checks. So this would be square root of 44 minus 3 equals square root of 22 plus 19. That would be 41. Square root of 41 equals square root of 11, 2, 3. That also comes out to 41. So since the left side equals the right side, then it checks. When the left side does not equal the right side, it doesn't check. That's when you would put that that's NAVS, not a valid solution. All right, look at 28D, number 15. Here, you have a radical and a number. And then over here, you have a radical. Even if I move my number over here, I still have a radical and a number. So here, we have to square that side so the radical goes away, which means you square this whole thing. Over here, that and that cancels and you're left with 2x. This does not cancel, okay? You need to FOIL it out. I'm going to rewrite it the long way. That means square root of 2x minus 1 times square root of 2x minus 1. Parentheses squared means a parentheses times itself. This has to be FOILed out. Okay, so it's this times this. Square root of 2x times square root of 2x is square root of 4x squared. Now that times that, square root of 2x times negative 1 minus square root of 2x. Now distribute the negative 1. That would be negative square root of 2x. Negative 1 times a negative 1 is a positive 1 equals 2x. I had to FOIL that out. Okay, we can do the square root of this. Square root of 4x squared is just 2x. Take the square root of everything under the radical. Combine these terms. That's a negative 1 of these and a negative 1 of these, which is a negative 2 of these. Plus 1. Now, the goal is to move everything over to the other side that's not a radical, because then we're going to have to square it again. Okay, so let's move this over here. That goes away, that goes away. Let's subtract that over. So then you have negative 2 square root of 2x equals negative 1. Here, you can divide this negative 2 over if you want. I'm not going to because it creates a fraction. So it's okay just to square everything here. Either way is fine. So actually, let's just go ahead and divide the negative 2 over. If I can get the radical all by itself, it is easier. So now I want to get the radical all by itself. A negative divided by a negative is a positive. Once you get the radical all by itself, you have to do the process all over again. So then to get rid of that radical, we have to square it, which means we square that. This cancels and you're left with 2x. This means 1/2 times 1/2. You're squaring the numerator and you square the denominator. So that would be 1/4. Now divide both sides by 2. That can be over 1. So this is a fraction divided by a fraction. Keep, change, flip. Keep this one, change to multiplication, then flip that one, take the reciprocal, times 1/2. So now x equals, multiplying straight across, 1/8. Okay, we have to check it, because not a guarantee that that answer will work. So over here, when we check it, going back to the original problem, that was square root of 2x minus 1 equals square root of 2x. That was the original problem. So square root of 2 times 1/8, I'm putting in 1/8 for x, minus 1 equals square root of 2 times 1/8. 1/8 is a fraction, so I can make that into a fraction. These cancel. 1/4. So that would be the square root of 1/4 minus 1 equals, same thing, this becomes a 1, that becomes a 4, so that would be the square root of 1/4. When you do the square root of a fraction, that's the square root of the numerator over the square root of the denominator. You take the square root of both. The square root of 1 is just 1. Square root of 4, just 2. Minus 1/2 equals square root of 1, 1 over square root of 4, 2. 1/2 minus 1, make a common denominator. That ends up being 1/2 minus 2 over 2 equals 1/2. 1/2 minus that would end up being a negative, only subtract the numerators, negative 1/2 Does negative 1/2 equal 1/2? No. So therefore, this answer over here becomes an NAVS, not a valid solution because it didn't check. Okay, let's look at 28D number 12. The square root of this equals square root of this plus this. Well, you can see we can't have just a radical on one side, just a radical on the other side. So there's not really any easy way to do it, but just to do it. So obviously, we need to square this side to get rid of the radical. Well, when you square that side, you square this whole thing. You can't just square that and that. It doesn't work that way. You have to put parentheses around the whole thing and square it. Well, over here, this square root and square cancels. So you're left with 2x plus 10. Over here, it doesn't work that way to where that cancels. You have to, this means the whole parentheses times itself. So you have to do the square root of 4x minus 3 plus 1 times 4x, the square root of 4x minus 3 plus 1. And you have to FOIL that out, okay? So the left side doesn't change. So let's FOIL this out. This times this. The square root of that times the square root of that. When you multiply the square root of something times the square root of something, the square roots cancel each other out. Like the square root of 2 times square root of 2 is square root of 4, which is just 2. You end up with just what's under the radical. So the square root of this times the square root of this will end up being just 4x minus 3. The radicals cancel each other out. Okay, then we take this times that. Well, the square root of 4x minus 3 times a positive 1 is just a plus square root of 4x minus 3. Now let's take that 1 and distribute it to everything. So that would be a plus square root of 4x minus 3. Then a positive 1 times a positive 1 is a positive 1. Now we combine like terms. These are alike. That we can combine like radicals. That's one of these plus one of these. Okay, so you have 2x plus 10, 4x minus 3. One of these plus one of these is 2 of these plus 1. Okay, combine like terms. Negative 3, positive 1. Combine like terms before you start moving everything around. Negative 3 and a positive 1, negative 2. Plus 2, square root of 4x minus 3. Do not add this 2 with everything because this 2 is multiplied to here. This is an x term. That's a number. This is a radical. You can't add numbers to radicals. Okay? Now, the whole goal is to get this radical all by itself so we can square everything again to get rid of it. So let's subtract, let's move these to the other side. So we need to subtract 4x to the other side. And then we're going to add 2 to the other side. So now we have negative 2x plus 12 equals 2 square root of 4x minus 3. If we want to divide 2, that's fine. If you divide 2 here, you have to divide 2 to everything over here. Okay? I'm going to work it to where we don't divide 2 in case it turns out that both of these numbers will divide evenly by 2, but what if it didn't? So I'm going to work it as if it wouldn't in case you come across one like that. So I can square this whole thing. I can square this whole thing. Okay, so squaring that means negative 2x plus 12 times negative 2x plus 12. You have to FOIL it out. Don't just say, oh, that's going to be 4x squared and that's going to be 144. No, there is a middle term. FOILing it out, that times that will be a positive 4x squared. That times that will be a negative 24x. This times this, negative 24x. This times this, plus 144. Okay, that's the left side. Now let's look over here. That means 2 square root of 4x minus 3 times 2 square root of 4x minus 3. This is not FOILing because there's no plus signs. This just means 2 times this times this times this. So this means multiplying numbers to numbers and radicals to radicals. Because truly this can be written as 2 times square root of that times 2 times square root of that. We'll move everything around because multiplication is commutative. So 2 times 2, 4, times square root times the square root cancels each other out, and you're left with 4x minus 3. Okay? Now this gets distributed because there is this subtraction sign right here. So let's combine like terms over here. 4x squared. I owe 24, I owe 24. So I owe 48x plus 144. Distributing my 4, 16x minus 12. Alright, so the fact that I have a quadratic equation. If you have a quadratic equation, how do you solve a quadratic equation? The very first step is set it equal to 0. Okay? Because this tells me I'm going to have 2 solutions. So subtract 16x over here. Add your 12. Those go away. So then that would be 4x squared minus 64x plus 156 equals 0. Well, I know I can factor a 4 out. Anytime you can factor something out, it makes your number smaller, it makes it easier to factor. So 4, that would be x squared minus 16x plus 39. Then we can see if this factors. Okay, this does factor, so, or else you have to use quadratic formula, but this does factor, so factors of 39. 39 times 1 or 3 times 13. This is a positive, but we're not in a positive world. So the other way to get a positive is a negative times a negative. So you have 4x, so this is going to factor in 2 parentheses, x, negative, negative. 39 and 1 is not going to work, so 3 and 13 are our choices. Make sure that that works out right. That would give you a negative 13, negative 3, which would give you the negative 16 in the middle. When this is just a number out here, that can be ignored. You can set both of these parentheses equal to 0. Solve both of these. One solution is x equals 3, but we have to check it. And then one possible solution is x equals 13. They have to be checked to make sure that this works. Anytime you have a radical problem, you have to check them. Alright, so going back to the original problem, checking it over here. So the original problem was this. Square root of 2x plus 10 equals square root of 4x minus 3 plus 1. Alright, let's check x equals 3 first. Everywhere we see an x, put in a 3. So that'd be 2 times 3 plus 10 equals square root of 4 times 3 minus 3 plus 1. Make sure that this is not under the radical. That'd be 6 plus 10, square root of 16 equals 4 times 3 is 12. 12 minus 3 is 9, so that'd be square root of 9 plus 1. Square root of 16 is 4. Square root of 9 is 3, and 3 plus 1 is 4. So x equals 3, check. So for sure, x equals 3 is a valid solution. Alright, let's check x equals 13. So square root of 2 times 13 plus 10 equals square root of 4 times 13 plus minus 3 plus 1. 2 times 13, 26, and 26 plus 10, 36. So that'd be square root of 36. 4 times 13. That is 52. And 52 minus 3, 49. So that would be square root of 49 plus 1. Square root of 36 is 6. Square root of 49 is 7. Plus 1 is 8. So that does not equal each other. So therefore, x equals 13 is not a valid solution. That's not a solution. Only x equals 3 is your real solution.